Hey peeps, welcome to my guest spot in association with the QTube. Hope everyone is good out there. My name's Tom, and I'm coming at you from my studio space just outside of North London. Thanks for having me, and I hope you find this topic of discussion, or at least some of it, useful. An area that I feel like isn't really talked enough about, which is the potential trials and tribulations of starting a project. Can be tricky. So I've gone with the title, Where the F Do I Start? Principles and Mechanisms for Finding Your In. I thought that was a good balance between academic, but also keeping it real. So we'll break it down into chapters. But before all that, let me introduce myself properly, and then let's get down to business. Right, got two screens on the go here. I'm also managing all the audio recording videos, so hopefully this all works nice and fluently. I'm sure it will when you see this. So I have got some slides for this as well, just to basically help keep me on track, but also make it nice and easy for you guys to follow along. Right, so introductions. Let me skip down to this. Something I really hate doing is talking about myself, but I am trying to get better at it. I always feel like I end up talking like David Brent. Anyway, so like I said earlier, my name's Tom. I kind of go under the composer name Thomas E. Brown just because it sounds much fancier. I am a media composer, amongst other things. Producer. Ghost Machine is my artist name, which is like an ambient textural project. I play guitar in some bands and do some session work. I'm a program leader and curriculum designer for the BA Music for Film, TV and Games ICMP in London. And I'm a golfer as well, so if anyone out there wants a round, feel free to hit me up. I'm sure all the links to my socials, etc. will be in the description or somewhere. So I'll just go back to media composer just for a second, because obviously that is the kind of the area that we are talking about. And so just a couple of notable credits. I scored the music for The Nightcrawlers, which won an Emmy and was shortlisted for BAFTA and Oscar back in COVID times. And also, probably the most notable current one is Making of an Activist, which is on Disney Plus, and a few other bits and pieces. Okay, like you can probably tell, I hate talking about myself, but also produce not necessarily media stuff, but just music in general, for artists, and co-write and songwrite, etc. as well. So feel free to check all that out. Feel free to get in touch if you want me to talk about any of that further. But phew, that's out the way. Let's move on. That's a nice picture though. I quite like that picture. Right, okay, so let's just do a quick intro into, I guess, the idea behind this talk and showcase. So the first kind of thing I want to talk about is, and this will be in this first chapter of Where the F Do I Start, is because starting a project can be like probably the most difficult thing. Until you get into a flow, I feel like it can be very overwhelming or intimidating. So I would say it's up there with the most difficult part of the entire process, creatively speaking. You know, we've got pressure, we've got expectation, maybe there's a blank timeline that is just there on the, on your DAW or whatnot. And sometimes we can't wait for inspiration, so we have to delve in quickly. So I guess on the slides here I've got, so rather than waiting for inspiration, relying on a few principles or mechanisms that might help find a way into a project or a scene. That means we don't have to kind of wait around for inspiration. So I guess this session, I'm not calling it a masterclass, but I'm just calling it a guest session, is, it does involve some psychological aspects, some practical, creative, and of course these are kind of my own thoughts, my perspectives, approaches that I use when I'm working. But also I just wanted to say that every project is different. But hopefully some of this stuff is useful to you. Right, let us move on to, I guess we can call this chapter 1, research and referencing. So long form versus short form is the subtitle for this. It's just to really make a note of, or kind of like mention that there are some differences between the two aspects. And I've reduced it down to as kind of a real base level. So this first section or chapter doesn't really involve any sort of DAW composing or anything. This is purely the background research and the context gathering and understanding and assimilating ideas. So let's have a look at the slides here. Just some bullet points that I want to, I guess, kind of go into a little bit more. So firstly, long versus short, the differences between the two. This is going to really depend on, again, what they are. That's the first thing. But if we take it, again, as a more of a universal approach, my thinking is short form, trailers. You can probably throw in short films, but mainly I'm thinking trailers and adverts or commercials, versus films, TV, games, things that have maybe a longer form in terms of music, but also in terms of time as well. And I just wanted to put that at the top, really, was because, in short form, you might well not have as much time to work on the background work and the background context than you would maybe in a longer form. And I've got an example that I just want to talk about from my film, from the one that I scored last, Making of an Activist. So I want to talk about that in a second, but I'll get onto that in a second as a case study. So long versus short, important to kind of know the differences, and then the time allowances with that, and also the idea of who you're working with and for as well, slightly different. So you might well be working with a filmmaker, a director, a producer, or you might be working with a creative team with a middle person that kind of goes back and forth, or there's actually quite a few differences or different options. But in any sense, I would say that understanding the brief that you are given, whether it's verbally, whether it's written down, whether it's a combination, is really important. So understanding the brief. So what is actually being asked of you? And that doesn't mean you can't then have your own input and your own thoughts on top, but it's got to be a conversation with what is being asked of you in the first instance. So that's one. Hearing the director or the producer or whoever your kind of port of call is and who you're working for and with. And I put hearing in brackets because you can listen to what they're saying, but hearing is more than that. So it's understanding exactly what they are after and then bringing your own input to the table and having a chat and developing and working on it as a team. But hearing is where it really starts, understanding their perspective, their intention, what they're looking for. So some really important kind of baseline things there when you're starting. You need to be aware that you're going to be a music translator a lot of the time. So, we're talking about equating descriptive or emotional language and how do we turn that into musical language? It's the classic, what does green sound like? What does blue sound like? As a kind of really obvious kind of descriptive or unmusical thing, non-musical thing, and then how do we do that in the musical sphere? But it's being able to translate hearing descriptive and emotional language and being able to, turn that into a musical language. But then also the musical language that you turn it into, does that translate back into the descriptive and emotional? So it's a really important kind of like timeline on that. So some things to do, definitely spend time actively consuming. That's an important thing. So when we're talking about that it's when you're doing your research, or when you're listening or looking or watching things, or gathering your thoughts and your ideas together, it's make sure you consume things actively, so you're really paying attention to everything. So that's another thing. Importance of research can be far and wide, doesn't have to be specific. Everything will have an impact in the final result or the output. So not everything has to be direct correlation. You might find some does and some doesn't. You might take one little thing from a massive area of research that you looked into. But I would say that the more research you do and the more collaborative your research is, actually the more kind of collaborative your output becomes. So if you had one reference point that you're trying to take a lot from, it might end up sounding too much like that one thing. So if you look at more aspects of research, what you'll find is when you put it all together, it becomes your own thing rather than you copying something that already exists. And then a couple other things, probably being aware that learning as you go. So you're going to have to apply your musical language or universal concepts potentially into new genres, new styles, using new instruments. And that's a skill in itself. So understanding baseline musical language, how can you apply that to create an output that you're looking for? And then final thing, and this is going to be really important with the case study, is musical and aesthetic sensitivity. And I'm going to talk about that in the case study in a moment, because it is to do with, in this particular instance, a documentary. So it's being very sensitive to the subject material and just having a real understanding of the aesthetic that is needed. So I'm going to jump into the next page. So this is a kind of a little intro into the making of an activist documentary that I've already mentioned. Feel free to go and watch it. It's on Disney Plus if you're into your docs. And just as a real brief intro, it's this documentary outlines some central themes around activism, personal transformation, societal change. And there's a podcast that goes with it as well. So that kind of complements the narrative, and it's a backstory. But essentially, the main doc is based around a decade-long effort that DeRay McKesson and some others, some allies, and it's like their push towards finding some change within society after the killing of Michael Brown. And it's a look at the data and how they kind of, once they discover a lot of this kind of underlying undercurrent of violence across USA, how do they look at kind of dismantling the system, I guess. And like I say, the podcast, there's a 3-part podcast on all the DSPs, and that is a look at, I guess, DeRay's origin story. So musically, there's a lot of cohesion and coherence between the two. So this is just in terms of research and referencing. I wanted to give you a background just so you understand what the documentary is about. But going back to that idea of research referencing, I want to show you what kind of research and referencing I did. And so this is on the next slide. I mean, here are some of the references that I use, and it's not even all of them. So these are some more of the direct references. It covers themes, music, aesthetic, instrumentation, not just the musical themes, but I'm talking about like the themes of the documentary. So we've got LA 92, 13th, Storyville. They all kind of like link with the same thematic material, but the like quirkiness of McQueen and Amadeus, the kind of like the Moonlight and Last Dance had some influence on the score, and then some interesting Moneyball, Big Short kind of mix. So this is kind of a reflection of what I was saying earlier. Is like if I just based my score on maybe Moonlight, it would sound like Moonlight potentially. Whereas if I've got all of these references, then it starts to sound like its own thing from a number of sources. I like doing this a lot. Okay, so that was kind of like my musical reference point. The other thing that was really interesting, and this is what we had conversation with director, is that I make a spreadsheet generally, and this was kind of one of the initial ones. So we've got some of those films, some other things on there that I could have included on that last shot that I showed you. Like I say, it was not all of the references. There were podcasts, visuals, YouTube links, web resources, films to watch, general research, more films, TV shows, Mr. Robot, because we wanted some data elements in there, potentially some True Detective. Then, and some of this was the director's ideas, some of it was my ideas, and some of it was like a collaboration. And we just, to start with, and we didn't write. I didn't write any music for this for about a month after coming onto the project, which lasted a year. So the first month was literally just actively consuming, discussing, watching things. We would decide what we'd watch. We'd both watch it separately. We'd come back, discuss, to really get a sense of what it was that we wanted to achieve and how that would kind of align with, coherence and consistency. So podcasts, that was filled out a bit more. Soundtracks, that was filled out a bit more. Like I say, this was kind of an early one. And then even just some descriptors and themes were kind of made note of. So there it is on Disney. So you're welcome to watch that. Great. That is kind of all I wanted to cover in this first chapter. So I think we'll end it there, and I'll see you in the next one. Welcome back. Okay, I'm getting into this now. I got over the scary first chapter, talking, recording, trying not to sound like David Brent. And let us now move into the next section. So you'll see on the screen, we have the kind of first, I don't want to say musical topic because the first chapter was highly musical, but this is the first, I guess, practical application within your DAW potentially. So I wanted just to discuss very briefly, and I won't talk as much as I did for the first chapter. I realised I went on a long time. So I wanted to just have a look at exploring and establishing pulse, discovering the internal tempo. So for me, this is the biggest one, the biggest, I guess the biggest factor in establishing what the music will be anyway. So you might well have had a discussion with the director or the creative team. So you might have a bit of intel or a bit of insight into what the music is or it needs to be. So for example, we're going to look at this idea in a second, but it might be that they want an 80s style track, or it might be more of a cinematic high energy thing. So even that information is going to kind of give you an inclination of what that will entail, musically speaking. However, all of that side will kind of be informed by the actual tempo, the pulse of what we're watching, and then also the music as well. So let's have a look at the slides. So I do this regardless of the project. I will watch without writing. I will resist any sort of temptation to hold down, trying to work out chords or anything like that. I think for me, and I would suggest trying this as well yourselves, is that before you think about harmony, before you think about orchestration, which is definitely something that's further along, even before thinking about like specific moments, I'm looking at pulse of the whole, just the general vibe. So what we're having, so within that, we've got like moments and we've got movement as well. So those are two very strong things for me. I think musically it can be amazing, but if it doesn't fit the right tempo, the right pulse of it, then it's always going to feel off. So I do this all the time. On my first pass, I don't even watch it within the DAW. So I would just, if there's an edit or something or a scene or whatever it is, I would watch it without putting it into the DAW. It's just too tempting to start pushing keys when it's in DAW, and that means that you're not thinking about anything within a DAW, markers, decisions. What you're doing is you're just observing the pace, the feel, the vibe, and it's essentially what an audience would be watching. It's getting rid of that kind of like idea of being in a music project. But the side quest is that you might actually naturally start internally idea forming without the pressure of actually sitting down and working something out. So you can passively start thinking of ideas the more you watch it. But that's definitely a side, like a secondary thing, I guess. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to, in fact, before I jump into the project, because I've actually put the film in there now, what I'd say is first pass without a DAW, maybe the second, third, fourth. You can watch it as many times as you want. There's no limit, of course. The more you watch, the more you pick up things, the more you see key moments, potentially, the more you get the vibe. Generally, the more you understand the feeling, the pace, the maybe the moments of silence, maybe the moments that you definitely need to hit. We're talking about spotting, right? Generally, but it's more of a I guess more of a mixture of active and passive spotting, if you like. So hopefully that makes sense. I've actually got it into my DAW now. So let me jump to it. Here it is. It's in my DAW. And this is the Marco kind of trailer. And so I've put it into there. I almost always start not on bar 1. That's just me. I actually usually start on bar 3 or 5. I don't know why it's on 4. That feels very uncomfortable. Let's move it along. Okay, so once I've watched it outside of the DAW, I would now watch it multiple times in the DAW with nothing else apart from metronome. So the metronome is going to inform me what I start to internally feel what the piece should be. And maybe this has been a conversation with the creative team or the director about what kind of pace they're looking for as well. So it's going to be a two-way conversation, but if we're kind of coming at it from the point of view of us, like I say, I almost always watch and always intently watch with only the click on or the metronome first thing. That gives me a starting point of what kind of pace feel I think it should be. First thing, I try multiple tempi. So, I try it, might just try it at 120. Then I might try it at 110. And I start to try and feel what fits. This potentially could be seen as a long way round, but I'm happy to sit there and spend the time trying to get an idea of what that should sound like or what it should feel like. But it's quite nice, right? You start to see where things align. So at 120, we could watch it, and things might. This is like a side thing as well. It's like, oh, that hit nicely, and you might start to discover these happy accidents where things fit in the nice kind of spot. You also might find that you think, oh, it does fit, but it's halfway through a bar. So then you think, okay, well, can I add a 2/4 bar in there? How can I make it work? So it's not the case of just doing it and it's done. It's like, we're working at a puzzle. We're trying to fit in these pieces. And, that's how it goes. I think that's how an organic process actually helps a lot. You can feel the resistance versus the alignment. That's kind of what I was saying. Where things hit on the bar, where things don't just hit, and you can think, well, let me change. I could maybe change the tempo. If it was at if I had it at 120 and now it's at 119, now it's starting to feel like it fits with a lot of the cuts as well. So that's another thing to think about. Looking for small moments as well as the wider arc. And then the other thing that I like to do, and this is a slightly more musical thing, is not just watch it with the metronome, because that is a slightly bleepy experience, or unmusical experience. Sometimes what I like to do is do some one-note mapping as well. Maybe a sustained rhythmic motif or an idea or an ostinato or something that helps. It does the same job as the metronome, but it gives me a bit more musical kind of like intel, if you like. The other thing you can do with one-note glories is you can actually play different ones at different moments as well. So you can actually start to shape an arrangement potentially, even just by mapping out a structure of feeling of pulse. So let's jump into my logic, because I just want to show what that means. So, for example, here is Marco, and I've just got it at 120. And if we just play it, there are things. This is what I do, right? I would play it with nothing apart from the metronome, such as this. Okay, you get the idea. I think that could potentially become just, not the most exciting of watch ever, but it's a really good thing to get into, because I'm not worrying about, no, what instruments do I use? I'm not worrying about anything apart from, when I watch this, does the pulse, does the tempo feel right? Are there moments where things align with the bars or the beats? What's the overall arc of that? And so that was at 120. Could easily watch it at 110. I'm not going to subject you to that, because that's just, we don't want to watch just me watching silence with a bleep. But that's the first thing, right? So I would do that. I would also then watch it with with all the other assets. So here we've got like the sound design, the voiceover type stuff here in this track, and I would also watch it with that, because that also will have an impact on everything else too. So I'm just trying to get a sense overall of everything. So just with the metronome, nothing else, then the metronome and the sound design if you have it, voiceover if you have it. So because that's what it's going to be at the end, right? So everything working together. So that for me is how I start, because if you can nail the timing, and that's the pulse in general, plus the moments of where things hit, you're halfway there. Because musically, there can be a gazillion different versions or ideas that musically hit, depending what is being asked of you in the brief. But timing is one of those where it needs to feel like it works, and it's as one with the picture that it's subserving. So that's one thing. And then secondly, what you could do, and this is what I was saying about earlier, is you could program in, and this is like, again, a different way of doing it. You could program in, just make sure everything is nice and tight with the grid. You could program in something like this, where you have a rhythmic idea, and that rhythmic idea is essentially working the same as the metronome, but there's just one level more to it, and it's the idea that you can actually start to create a musical idea potentially. Now, these are placeholders, so I'm not going, this is my rhythmic track, this is what it's going to be. They are acting, or they are tools, and they are acting as guides for, well, what does 120 feel like musically? What rhythms will that feel like? And also the great thing, like I said, with the one note glories is you can add to it, you can change them. So I might have one idea for 8 bars, for example, or for 6 bars or whatever it is. Then I might either switch it out for another 4 bars, or I might layer them. So you can start to create a shape within your musical metronome, and that will help kind of give an idea, a sense of what that would feel like. So for example,
Marco, come in. You can tie the car.
right, a little bit repetitive, but that's the function of it. We're looking for something that's functional here. Now, you can kind of, when you do this, you can kind of feel where things are right, where things are wrong as well, and not wrong, but not right or wrong in that sense, but what feels like it works, what doesn't quite work. And the great thing is, you can look along the grid and you go, well, actually, maybe I could just start. Maybe I'll just start this one here, so it hits on the cut, and so that comes in. And so I'm almost passively starting to think in my head where the shape of this arrangement is going to be. So that is a really good starting point for me. I always start with the rhythm and the organization of the pulse. And so I would recommend trying that if you're stuck, or you're never sure where to start. I think it's really good to kind of work on finding a pulse like this, because you're working on multiple things at the same time. Pulse, but I'm already starting to think of arrangement. I'm already starting to think what feels like it works, what doesn't quite. I can shape something. So I'm like I said earlier, it's like a musical metronome. It's a functional thing, and I'm trying to make this metronome that is a little bit more than just bleeps feel like it has a shape to it. And then you can cut things out. You could maybe stop it where there's a moment where you think it should be silence. And again, like I said earlier, the puzzle, is what we're trying to aim to get. And so we're trying to fit all these puzzle pieces in to make it work. I'm even bringing in analogies right now. Okay, so let me check. I think that is it for this one. Hope that makes sense. And I will see you in the next one. All right, we're back. Okay, I'm well into this now. Let us look at the next chapter. So this one's called Narrative Architecture, Key Moments and Markers. So what we're looking at in this is kind of, I guess it's a development of the last kind of focus we looked at. And it's this kind of idea of spotting key moments and then actually now using some architecture to map out that. So things to think about: structural pivots, emotional anchors, entry and exit decisions, where not to score. And so this idea is using markers as a tool to map narrative. That's one thing. And then secondly, using markers to create a narrative, potentially. And then we've got sync points / hit points that we need to think about as well. So basically just a fancy way of saying we can start mapping out, giving ourselves a structure, giving ourselves a framework to work within. And so if we look at the project that we were on here, what I tend to do, let's just go with just the metronome for now. Let's bring out the video. What I tend to do is there's the shortcut option or alt and the speech mark. And what I do is, as I'm watching, what we're watching, right? So here, I probably would have done one right at the beginning, marker 1. And then as I go through, what I'm looking for is anything that is of interest in a wider capacity. So here is not very much. Obviously, we've got some talking going on, but I might mark out this one here. So there's marker 2. And okay, I might have done one there, probably would have done one there. I'm just looking at the wider overall story at the moment, the narrative. Okay, so there's another one. So what I like to do is just go through and kind of map out what we're looking at here. So the great thing with this particular DAW, let's mark a 4 there, right? So what I would suggest is that mark 4 could be there, right? So in fact, let's just move that. So what I'm thinking of, like, if it's musically speaking, am I going to add a 2/4 bar in there? It depends on the tempo. It depends on a lot of things to start with. But essentially, what we could do here is we could mark out and map out what we're watching. So what we can do here in this particular DAW, we have marker sets. So what I would suggest thinking about is you can have different marker sets for different kind of moments. So for example, I might think, okay, well, I'm going to have a time codes marker for real specific moments of hit points. I might have, let's get rid of that. I might have on the movie, I might think, well, okay, I need something that gives me the general, like, overall arc of the storyline, as in like intro, first section of like black, if you like, and voiceover. This section, another kind of cut there. So I might find that I've got maybe multiple layers of markers here, and you can kind of look through here. I could have called this something like overall narrative potentially. So let's rename it. So like overarching story. That's long. Overall. And so what I can do is I can start to map out in my head and also in the project what the sections are, what the changes are as an overall story, but then also can go in and actually go specific. And if I really wanted to, I could go through every little bit. If it just as an idea, right? And you can see that the markers kind of like they go to the bars in my project. Then I can move it around if I need to as well, and command and click on a marker to shorten the marker length. Otherwise, it goes on forever, and that's very infuriating. So that is what I suggest doing, just to get, again, you're not really like committing to anything in terms of like writing. I like to go through and really get an idea of the story or the narrative across the whole thing. It doesn't mean I necessarily stick to all of these. That's just too much to stick to, right? Oh, I need to do a marker there and a there and a there and a there. Oh, and then there's the overarching thing, and it can get a bit too much. But for me, it helps my headspace as to understanding what is actually going on. So it's another way of kind of interpreting, comprehending what I'm watching and what is being asked of me. So the other thing is, and this is just as a side, I guess as a side, I'm going to say side quest again, side quest, is that, first of all, I've done this, right? I'm mapping out the narrative on the actual film, in this case, or the trailer. You can actually use markers to create your own narrative as well. So you can superimpose your ideas onto what we're watching. And also, if you're writing tracks outside of working to picture, i.e. if you're writing a library track or something, I like to use markers to create a narrative. So, again, if you're staring at a blank page, I like the idea of going, okay, well, I want to get to this point. There's a track that I was writing recently called Through Horizon. And so the idea is through Horizon is the last section, and then I work backwards to essentially map out using markers a structure for me to work within. So creative restrictions is an interesting way of working, and that helped me build and shape my track. So again, it's a really good way of I guess finding an approach to starting a project or to developing something if you kind of get stuck. Especially if you're working with lots and lots of footage, or you're writing a big track, it's good to firstly keep organized, secondly to kind of just keep on top of everything, and thirdly to really help align your project and therefore your music with what we are seeing on screen. Right, that is the end of that one. I think I'm just going to try and keep that a little bit shorter than the others, but hopefully use markers. Different DAWs have different kind of ways of doing them, but I would definitely use markers. Obviously you can double click and call it things, so it's just an organizational tool that really helps me understand what it is I'm even doing. All right, see you in the next one. Okay, right, I'm all good. I'm into this now. Let's crack on with the next chapter. I think I've got over myself with talking. Right, so let's have a look at the slides that I've got here. So I've called this one Sonic Identity and Sound Worlds. So curating a sound palette. Right. Well, what I mean by that is I don't want to use the word, well, I'm going to use the word, essentially a template. Lots of people use templates, especially probably if you're in the world where you use particular sounds all the time. You know, you might just have your sound, and you know, I get it if you have maybe a template that incorporates orchestral an orchestral work, but a lot of the time when I work on projects, I like to start with nothing. I like to part of my process actually is to build the sounds. And now, obviously, this is depending how much time you have, and this relates back to the long form thing where if you have enough time, then it's great. You can kind of organically work on a new batch of sounds, a new palette. And so I did this with both the Nightcrawlers and Making of an Activist and some of the other projects that I've done. And it's part of the bit that it's actually the bit I enjoy the most, is building the sounds, building the sound worlds, finding the identity of the music. Those two projects I mentioned, and there's been a couple of others where time has allowed me to do this because I've come on from the beginning. The Nightcrawlers took 3 years to do ish. Making of an Activist was a year. The project in between that one was a year as well. So being on from the start just allows you to kind of really take ownership of the sonic identity. Right, so let's move to the next slide. So when I'm talking about sonic identity and sound worlds, when I'm talking about curating a sound palette, I'm essentially like auditioning tonal palettes, finding sounds that I like, sounds that give a mood, things that I like. Just maybe it might be even just one element of it, or it might be having a particular sound that I know I'm going to use. For example, if I'm going to be using a piano, I will load that one up and have it. So that'd be one thing. Then I would maybe experiment and find other areas of instrumentation or sound design or sounds, or, you know, it can be very obvious sounds to very kind of random and interesting and unique. It's about experimenting. So, you know, exploring the instrumental colors, experimenting. It's going to depend on the palette of the project. You know, it might be, and maybe the direction of the director or creative team, like, it has to be this. So therefore you are restricted to a certain group of sounds, which you can probably then expand on a bit. But so there's all these extra decisions and like aspects to consider. But in this instance, I'm just pretending that it's a blank canvas and we have all free reign. So experimentation is good. And then I would register your decisions, like what works, what doesn't. And by creating a template or multiple templates or a palette, you are almost kind of registering that decision. Like, yeah, this is going to be in there somewhere. So you're kind of making a decision there, which, as someone who's very bad at making decisions, that's a workaround that I have to do. Density in space, timbre as a narrative, grouping sounds together as a stack. We'll do that in a second, but just, not just the sound, but like, what does it do? What do they do together? What is the output? What am I trying to achieve by choosing these particular sounds? So, timbre or aesthetic, another word, it's good to kind of use. And then what am I trying to find in terms of the aesthetic of a sound? And how does that firstly contribute to the narrative, or how does it extend it or expand it? This is one of the most important creative times as well, is finding out the sounds that you want to work with. Now, this may develop throughout the project. I worked on this Nightcrawlers project for 3 years, and things changed. One of the main cues that I wrote, because I wrote the temp music for this one and the Making of Activist, more or less, some of the stuff that was in there from the beginning that I wrote, we swapped out in the end, but it really did help inform what the aesthetic of the whole project was going to be. It has a very big influence on the visuals. Just going back to Marco, if we had a cinematic-y thing, it would be very different from an 80s inspired soundtrack. So both may work depending what the objective, what the intent is of the visuals, but yeah, both can work. It just depends on the intent, essentially. Right, so the other thing I just wanted to mention was grouping sounds together. That's an organizational thing. It's a bit like the markers going from left to right in this sense, but what I'm looking at is I'm looking at grouping like-minded tracks together. Now, firstly, it's to group them so I know that they've all got like their own kind of like team or their own identity, but it's also to keep everything nice and neat and not overwhelming, because if we start opening these track stacks, now I haven't done it for everyone, I should have. So do you know what? This gives me a chance to do it now. So I'm going to highlight the symbols and I'm going to go Command Shift and D, and I'm just going to put it into a folder. So create, and then that will give me symbols. And so now I've got, I know they're all together now. They're all friends hanging out with one another. So obviously I can expand that as and when I need to. Same with the synths. In fact, if I just show you what it looks like without the track stacks, this particular project, firstly, it doesn't fit on the page. And just imagine trying to just like work with this. It's just so hard to do. Like, I'll scroll down to track 79. Okay, back up to 15. So instead, what I like to do is if you track stack them, I essentially put them in their own folders. That looks much more appealing. And what I can do is I can jump into the piano section and work on something in there. And then I can close that and I can go to the rhythmic section, for example, and then move to the orchestral section and just keep it nice and neat. So the other thing I want to do is I'm actually just going to play you this this track, this cue from the Nightcrawlers, and just it's almost like a culmination of all the things that I've talked about already. Markers, so the island, and then water, the left to right organization. So we've got a time signature, which is starts from the beginning of the project. 4/4. We've got a change of tempo. Well, it's a starting tempo really, 76 here within this. I used the tempo just to make sure my starting point was aligned with what I wanted, where I wanted it to be. And then we're going to go through at bar 60. It goes to a 6/4. If my eyes, it's a 5/4. I really should change the colour of this. Markers can't see them. Here we go. 5/4. So we've got one bar of 5/4, one bar of 3/4. Yes, they work out as two bars of 4/4 on next to each other, but for me, it helped me feel where that that kind of section needed an extra beat in there, and then the section after needed one less. And then we got 5/4 again, 4/4, 2/4, 4/4, 5/4, 4/4, and that just helped me align the composition up with the visuals. And then the other thing is, of course, is can you make that feel natural so it doesn't just stick out? Because that's one thing that you want to avoid, is to bring too much attention to the music in this case, especially if it doesn't sound right. So also the other thing just to mention is that at this point we're at 76 BPM, and then at when the water kicks in, we go up to 78 BPM. And that is just to give it that slightly bit more urgency, and also to align with the end as well. So you'll find a lot of these things that happen, they are multifunctional. So let's listen to this, and what I'll do is I'll kind of like expand and close the track stacks just to kind of give you a sense of the details. And just to kind of summarize there, it's the reason why is, it's auditioning the tonal palettes but then grouping them. Exploring and experimenting, this was a result of that. Finding out what was good in terms of shape, the density, the space, what the timbre is, what the aesthetic is of the narrative. And then, again, as a pure organizational thing, grouping them together so we can actually cope, basically. And that was the opening of the film. So, it needed to have its impact. But again, going back to one of the earlier chapters with this was sensitivity as well. So sensitivity to the story and the narrative. Again, the documentary. This was the one that won the Emmy and was shortlisted for Oscars and BAFTAs. And definitely something we talked a lot about in terms of a theme, not music, but just in general, a general theme is to make sure that we are respectful to the material and to not go overboard. So a mature sound, something that sounds sophisticated, but also slightly gnarly, but also organic. And again, with those phrases, auditioning those tonal palettes, having those words there helped locate them, help find them. The film also thematically is a mixture of very rural, I guess organic, again, that word, meets with cyberpunk, that kind of Philippines, city of Manila. And so again, contrast of those two things as well. So having that in mind gave me kind of I guess, a direction as to, where to start with the tonal palettes. But yeah, a lot of experimentation, exploration, finding interesting instrumental colors, but also some kind of like rhythmic elements that were more cinematic and more obvious that help drive the pace and the momentum. Right, okay, so that is the end of that one. Hope that all made sense. And on to the next. Thanks very much. All right, can't get enough. Right, here I am again. Hope you're still with me. Welcome if you are. Well done for sticking around. But the penultimate one here is has been called Creative Infrastructure, Designing Your System. Now, a lot of this is covered in the last section, so it's kind of a development of that. In fact, all of these kind of mini chapters are developments on the previous one. So creative infrastructure, designing your system, it does relate to how you set up your, your palette, and how you set up your template or your session structure, however it is that you'd like to work. I'd like to talk about how I usually do it. I mean, it's slightly changed over the last few years, I would say. I'm more organised than I was. I think I've always been pretty organised, but I kind of get even more kind of very specific about how things are set up now. So let's jump in to this. Right, so building systems that support creativity. So organisation, I'm a big advocate of organisation. I think it really helps. I think that's just in life. If everything's neat and organised, it's easier for me to deal with. I like organisation. I like the idea of grouping like-minded sonic families together, so I can, I'm optimizing my workflow because I can kind of work within that one track stack or that one folder. I also like creating, internal hierarchies. That kind of, is the same as the first 2 points, but I'll talk about that in a second in terms of the internal hierarchies of how you set up your system, which I will talk about shortly. Designing the control before chaos, like creativity and experimentation can be quite chaotic. So I like to kind of balance that out with a bit of control in there. It helps reduce friction, it's optimization of workflow. This is a big one, building a scalable session. Again, I was saying this in the previous, that if you're working with all your tracks there, you might have 80, 100 more. It's quite unmanageable. So to have them all grouped together in folders or in stacks, it's a lot easier, especially when those projects start to scale up and you start to introduce more and more tracks within there. I quite like doing it as a kind of as part of the creative process as well, because it's kind of a low stress, quite mechanical thing to do, and feels quite productive. Feels like you're making, because you have to do it at some point anyway, I would assume. And so just kind of doing it within that first bit, and I don't do all of it in one go. I would do it throughout the whole project process, but having that kind of like initial organization, it feels very good for me. And this is something that has changed a little bit, is different projects for different scenes. I usually do 1 or 2 cues per project, depending. Again, all depends on everything, but as soon as you start getting longer material, firstly the computer might not be able to handle it, but it's much easier for me to treat a cue in a project, and especially if they've got like-minded sounds. Now, if that theme or those textures are used again, I would just duplicate the project and I would, again, focus in on that one scene, and I would trim the movie just so it's that one section. Or I might find that 2 go together, so like, they need to be in the same project. But I quite like doing that. Again, it's like more focused, definitely more focused than just having the whole film in there. Depends, of course, what it is. So that's why I like to build systems, I guess. Also, it's just for optimization of workflow. So I'm going to jump into this project that I've got here. it's another one from the Nightcrawlers. Looks like 1, 2, 3, 4 tracks. Let me just do what I did last time. So 4 tracks of music, 1 track of, in this case, everything but music. And so let me just open the synths and also the rhythm and also the orchestra, not many, and also the sound effects. Okay, so now that's what my project looks like. Yikes. As you can see, I've got loads and loads of different versions of the same thing. Again, it was just, that's just because. Different endings, there was different edits, and so it was just, I used this particular project to try all the different versions, and then had the main version in the right place in the film. Anyway, so there are too many layers of synths, especially. So if I just close all of them up again, that's better. So first of all, I'm going to just reiterate what I said earlier in the previous. Track stacks / folders, amazing. You can hide things. You can just cope with the project if you have loads and loads of tracks. That's great. So that's within the project's visual organization. And then the other thing I want to mention is, if I bring up the mixer, is I like to send everything to their own buses or their own auxes. So the idea is, not only are they visually grouped together in the arrange page, but if we look at synths, for example, they're all going to bus 4. If I go across the bus 4 is, it's my own fault for choosing such a light coloured theme on the thing. Bus 4, where are you? Bus 4. See, that's my issue of closing it. There we go. I'm gonna have to lean in. Bus 4. Okay, so bus 4 is here. It should be going to a synth bus. This is where I'm going to do myself in here. It's bus 4. Synths. There we go. I knew it. So the synths, it's going to the synth bus. It would be really helpful if I actually, there it is. Oof, that was tricky. Okay, so there's a bus, there's a synth that there's a bus that all of these synths go to. I've just got to remember there's some crazy, maybe some crazy routing going on. This is a few years old now. Bus 14. Bus 14 is here. That's extras. So I've called it extras. So essentially, my music, my score, all feeds into their own buses. Now, this is particularly appropriate when I'm working on maybe just a track with an artist. They would all go to, it might be like guitars, bass, drums, keys, vocals. That would be too simplistic for me. I'd have maybe guitars clean, guitars distortion, guitars master. Then vocals might be backing vocals 1, backing vocals 2, 3, or even just backing vocals in general, and then lead vocals, and then those 2 buses would be going into a final one called vocals master. So with drums, you can put basically as many stepping stones in the way before it comes to the final stereo output. And that's something I would recommend. You have more control over each individual element, but also you have control over the synths as one thing, the sound effects as another thing, the rhythm as another thing. Now, what I find in the case of working in media is important is that you have the voiceover going to one bus, you have the sound effects potentially going to another bus, and then for me, what I'd do is I'd group those together and just call it non-music. I don't know, something that defines it from my score or my music. So I can just mute them if I just want to work on the music. Or if I want to bring them both in, I can click, the mute button and bring them back in. Or if I want just to have the voiceover there and not the sound effects, I can do that. So I have a lot more control. It saves so much time. If you've got if you've got loads and loads of tracks of voiceover and sound effects and whatnot, you have to go in and mute them individually or go, oh, which one's this, which one's that. It's much better to create this bus routing system where you basically have, in the end, your chain could be score or 2-bus. That's your thing. And then basically VO or dialogue or asset, all the other assets. So you might end up with an A and B or a, just 2 basically, that allows you to mute or solo or turn up and down every step of the way. So with that in mind, I'll just show you this. And if I play the track, I'll just show you that I can just mute this stuff straight away. Okay, so that's just a look at some internal routing, because oh my god, there is definitely too much to cope with that one. Right, hopefully that makes sense. Again, you can do this in a number of ways, but in a DAW, for example, I would just go. You can either go to the mixer or you can go to the instrument strip on the left, and you can, rather than in Logic, the case is that it's set to stereo output as the main kind of the main routing, but you can change that directly. So for example, the orchestra is going to the score here, and so if I go to here, if I go to the orchestra score bus 6, I can just choose and send it to a free one. I could bus 16. It could be orchestra master, for example. So you can send the whole thing to a different stepping stone, or you can use bus routing to send a portion of your track in parallel. So you might add a reverb onto a separate channel, and then you can feed in any other instrument or instrument groups to that reverb, so you can again have more control over the dry sound and the reverb, as opposed to just inserting it on the channel. And that's something that I also just should mention, is that all of these things within your infrastructure and also your sonic identity and sound worlds, which is the previous chapter, production value, use of reverbs, creative tools, modulation, delay, whatever it is, they are part of your sonic identity and sound world. It's not just the instruments that you use or the sounds you use, it's the sounds plus the things that you add to shape that sound, whether it's an EQ, whatever it is. So just bear that in mind, that production, adding effects, that changes the timbre, or that changes the aesthetic of the sound that you're working with. Okay, great. Thanks for sticking around. Well done for making it if you got this far. I just wanted to add this little bit on actually to that idea of infrastructure. Is I'm going to go back to Marco, which is what our kind of our focus is on. And let's say we have mapped out everything marker-wise, right? So that's our kind of left to right timeline. I just want to do what I was saying about in the last project about how you can do it. So let's just do it in real time. So I'm going to go to the mixer. Again, this is logic based. So X on that. Other DAWs are available. And so Marco 4K unscored. That is all my sound effects. So what I can do is I'm going to go to the stereo output. I'm going to choose bus. I'm going to choose bus 20 because why not? And let's call that assets. I don't know, whatever it is. Okay, so that's my assets. Let's create a few more tracks because why not? And so let's say we have loads and loads of classic electric piano because that's exactly what this piece needs. Yeah, obviously it's named the default at the moment. Right, but let's pretend this is our score. So the first thing, Command Shift and D, and that's going to take us to the folder. Now I could go something if I wanted to. I'm just going to go folder. I like the process of having the basic stack that is more of an organizational thing, and I like to route things manually. So if we go create there, and I'm going to call this my score. Now you might have, that might be orchestral, that might be instrumentation, that might be something else. But let's just say we've got score. In fact, let's call this sound effects because, let's just call this voiceover actually. Let's just pretend this is a separate thing here. Okay, so those are our, that's the way we can organize it within a project. I'm going to go to the mixer now, and I'm going to have a look at what I've got here. So assets is one thing. The voiceover, currently there's nothing there. So I'm going to choose both of those tracks. I'm going to go to bus. I'm going to go to bus 21 because I'm a grown up and I can choose my own bus number. So that's going to be voiceover. And then I'm going to close that. And then my score, I'm going to highlight all of those. Shift click to highlight those. And at the moment, they're all going to the stereo output. I want to put a stepping stone in the way. So I'm going to click one. I'm going to choose bus. I'm going to go with bus 24, which is my 2 bus. If anyone knows me, my love of the TV show 24 is the reason why you see 24s everywhere. So this, I could call it 2 bus if I wanted, or I could call it my score, my final score. How about score master? And so essentially what you do is you end up with lots and lots of channels. I might decide that I want this, all of those things together in a final stage, my final 2 bus that has everything. And then I might put effects on that, and then I would just leave the stereo output and the master at unity. But I then have control over every individual element along the way. So I thought I would just add that in as an extra, and I will see you in the next one. Right, final one, bonus. I hear the cries in the background. So just again, I wanted to bring this into focus for the last chapter. I've called this Your Space, just because my space was taken for any early 2000s people out there. And I called the subtitle Environment, Energy and Ownership. And I think this is a really important thing that is fairly obvious, I think, but also, again, not really maybe talked about enough. And that is finding things that help you with your creativity. And for me, it's the space that I work in. And these things are always adapting, changing. You get new gear, you get, the more things you do, the more you can finance something new. So this is an evolving approach and evolving practice. But it's important to have an environment that you feel like safe in, creative in, inspired, and in control. Because this is ownership. This is an area that we can control. Is where we work. In what space we work in, whether that's on a laptop in a bedroom or in a studio space in a room or in a high-end studio. And it doesn't really matter what it is, just as long as it works for you. So I just wanted to bring to kind of focus a couple of things, and I might be able to do a few kind of like videos of the space I work in if I can, or I might just describe what I've got. So for me, everything contributes, right? But for me, lighting is hugely important. I like to have good mood lighting. I use like LED floodlights in a nice soft orange color, generally. Some cool lights in and around the studio space, in kind of key places, so they kind of uplight or backlight certain areas, especially around the back of the desk. So that's an important thing. Layout is really important. So things to hand for me, I like to be able to grab my guitar. So I've got like a series of guitars behind me, different ones. As guitar is my main instrument, although I compose mainly on keys, which is underneath on a pull-out drawer. So I've got guitars there. I've got synths behind that as well. Synths on here. I've got some outboard gear that I can easily access. So easily accessible stuff is important. Pedal steel and some more like instrumental, experimental things over the other side. But I like things to be at hand. That's physically, but also within the door as well. Having things at hand is always very useful. A widescreen, curved, which I moved from a 3-screen thing before, which was like a biggish screen, a smaller screen for the desk, and a screen for, like the mixing desk, and a screen for the movies. And now I'm just running, like I say, adapting as you go. Now I'm running a big widescreen curve thing, and so a dual thing, mixer or film on the wall. Generally use the mixer on the curved screen as well. So I've actually found that's a little bit more kind of easy to use. What else? Instruments, instruments around. Lots of random instruments that you can pick up and just play and put down again. A microphone set up always, so you can record. And I think you'll find a lot of composers and people do that. Then you've got playback systems. So I've got generally two. I've got a 2-speaker set up here, so I can audition A and B. So yes, Barefoots at the front here, and then Adam Audio's at the back. Be very comfortable with your DAW. Just know the shortcuts. Optimization is important. Again, both in the box and out. And I would say, but more importantly, like comforts for me. Think having things in the room that's important. I've got I'm a big sports fan, so I've got like ice hockey jerseys around, some football stuff. I've got 24 Jack Bauer thing over there. I've got my kind of like items throughout the years that are kind of like spread around, and all of those things make it feel like my space. Feel creative. Plants always nice. A duck. Random things that help, that contribute to a feeling of like security and being able to kind of like work creatively and most importantly comfortably. Because there might be late nights, there might be days of working. I had to do a couple of overnights on Making of Activists at the end, and so being able to have enough room, maybe just to sleep. There's a sofa at the back there that can do that. So getting a room that's comfortable. And then finally, lighting is one. Chair is another. I decided to invest in a good chair years ago, and I never looked back. Figured that getting a decent chair would save, firstly, back pain, but it would pay for itself in the future. So I would say that is 100% one of the most vital things that you can do. So I think that's the end of all the chapters. Hope you found this useful to some degree, and if you did, great. Please feel free to get in touch. Like meeting new people. I've really enjoyed doing this actually for QTube, and yeah, please reach out on the socials, say hello, and I look forward to being hopefully invited back to do another one. Right, thanks for that. Over and out, and see you on the next one.